But first, 2 weeks ago, President Trump withdrew the United States from the Iran nuclear deal, which limited the Islamic Republic's nuclear program in exchange for sanctions relief. Today, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo unveiled the administration's new Iran strategy. Here's Foreign Affairs and Defense correspondent Nick Schifrin.
In his first major speech as Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo painted Iran's government as the source of Middle East instability.
The regime reaps a harvest of suffering and death in the Middle East at the expense of its own citizens.
The new strategy targets Iran's economy. The Trump administration believes reimposing sanctions will cripple Iran's finances, so it can't afford its nuclear program or support regional proxy groups.
Iran will be forced to make a choice. Either fight to keep its economy off life support at home or keep squandering precious wealth on fights abroad. It will not have the resources to do both.
Targeting Iran's economy could end up targeting European companies that sell Iran products, like the aircraft manufacturer Airbus, French oil company Total, and French automaker Peugeot. Pompeo said the U.S. would not be swayed if U.S. policy hurt economic interests.
I know that they may decide to try and keep their old nuclear deal going with Tehran. That is certainly their decision to make. They know where we stand.
The strategy also calls for the U.S. military to counter small Iranian boats that threaten U.S. ships in the Persian Gulf, and Hezbollah fighters based in Lebanon and Syria.
We will track down Iranian operatives and their Hezbollah proxies operating around the world, and we will crush them.
The U.S. also wants to increase internal pressure on the Iranian regime. Pompeo said the U.S., quote, stood with anti-government protesters who, like some in the administration, have called for a government overthrow.
We hope, indeed we expect, that the Iranian regime will come to its senses and support, not suppress, the aspirations of its own citizens.
And Pompeo said if Iran gave in to 12 fundamental demands, permanently abandoning the nuclear program, ending the missile program, ending support of proxy groups, the U.S. would offer Iran a sweeping new relationship with economic support and full diplomatic normalization.
It is America's hope that our labors toward peace and security will bear fruit for the long-suffering people of Iran.
And joining me now is Brian Hook, who helped develop the policy on Iran. He is the Senior Policy Advisor to the Secretary of State and the Director of Policy Planning. Earlier this month, he was in Pyongyang ahead of the planned summit with Kim Jong-un, and he also led negotiations with the Europeans ahead of President Trump's decision to withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal. And Brian Hook, welcome back to the News
Thanks.
Hour.
Good to be here again.
Thanks very much. We just heard from Secretary Pompeo this list of 12 demands. And I talked to some people today who criticized some of the speech. They talked about it as magical thinking, ultimatums, not diplomacy, dead on arrival. This seems to be a wholesale transformation of Iranian policy. Are those demands dead on arrival?
No. The list of 12 demands that Secretary Pompeo laid out today have been agreed to at one time or another by our European allies. If you were to break down this list into categories, it's around ending Iran's nuclear program so that they can't enrich. It's denying them the ability to support terrorism, to fund proxy wars, to destabilize other countries, to detain citizens arbitrarily. This whole list of 12, a lot of it grew out of our negotiations with our European allies. And these are all very reasonable demands.
The speech specifically mentions the Iranian people multiple times, and at one point Secretary Pompeo said it is up to the Iranian people to make this change quickly. If it doesn't happen, then we will continue the U.S. pressure on Iran. Is the goal, therefore, actually either for the Iranian people to overthrow their own government or for the U.S. somehow to get some kind of regime change?
We are looking for a change in the behavior of the Iranian regime. And if they can change their conduct in a number of the key areas that Secretary Pompeo outlined, there can be a much better future for the Iranian people, and the United States is prepared to enter into an entirely new relationship with Iran, one that completely lifts all of the sanctions, that has full diplomatic ties, that welcomes Iran into the global economy. But they can't do that if they still intend to acquire a nuclear weapon, if they want to destabilize and stoke violence and instability across the Middle East, and violate the human rights of their own people.
How do you get China, Russia, and the Europeans to create the same economic pressure on Iran that existed in 2013 today when it's not clear they're willing to do that?
Well, it's very early. We've just started this process. And so the plan is to continue working with our allies, as we have been over the last few months, to create a new security architecture. And as that process unfolds, you'll see more countries entering into those discussions. And we're very hopeful about the diplomacy ahead. We think that over time, as we work for a new and better deal, that we will have more countries supporting us.
Secretary Pompeo today talked about trying to get a new deal that would be a treaty in the U.S. Senate with Iran. Right. Does the U.S. want a treaty with Kim Jong-un that would be confirmed by the Senate?
We are very open to a treaty with North Korea. The president has talked about a very bright future for the North Korean people if the regime can end its nuclear and missile program, among other things. But we are open to a treaty relationship with North Korea under the right conditions. And as Secretary Pompeo has said, we're also open to a treaty relationship with Iran, again, under the right conditions. But we're trying to set forth a very positive and hopeful vision for the North Korean people and for the Iranian people.
The National Security Advisor, John Bolton, brought up Libya when talking about Kim Jong-un. He talked about the Libya model, referring to 2003 efforts to try and get Libya to denuclearize. But of course, Gaddafi, the head of Libya, ended up dead in a ditch a few years later. Was it not understandable that Kim Jong-un might hear the words Libya model and think, oh, this isn't going to end well for me?
I think what we're trying to accomplish there about the complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization in North Korea, that's our objective. And there's a lot of different ways to describe achieving denuclearization. Libya made the decision to get rid of its nuclear weapons. You've also had South Africa get rid of its nuclear weapons. A number of countries have decided that the cost-benefit of having a nuclear program just isn't there. And so we are very focused on creating a framework where it's in North Korea's interest to denuclearize. And we are ready to discuss a range of benefits for North Korea if they're willing to denuclearize.
How do you convince Kim Jong-un that denuclearization doesn't end up with his death if you're going to bring up Libya?
Well, Secretary Pompeo has now met with Kim Jong-un twice, and I think that's really been the center of the discussions, have been those two people to date. Those have been very good meetings, and I think that they are doing a good job to create the right kind of positive framework so that President Trump and Kim Jong-un can have a very productive meeting in Singapore.
There is some doubt within the administration about the summit that's scheduled for a few weeks from now. And I'm wondering what's changed, because you were in Pyongyang meeting with Kim Jong-un, with Secretary Pompeo, and you received some reassurance about what North Korea sees as denuclearization. So what's changed to create the doubts about this summit today?
I think we did have very good discussions in North Korea, and the purpose of that trip was to set the table for the discussion between President Trump and Kim Jong-un.
Is there a chance this summit might not happen?
I'm always hopeful on diplomacy, and we're going to keep at it until we get to June 12th.
Brian Hook, thank you very much.
Thank you.